Namaste. I am so thrilled that after 26 years of offering the Journey Intensive in person and live, that we're finally able to offer to you a Journey Intensive that's also live, but that you get to take in your own home, especially during this time where many of us are unable to travel to a live seminar. And so my prayer was that it was as deep an immersion as the live one would be with me. And so I'm really welcoming you to join in, and you're going to be sharing this seminar with other people and cross-processing with them and undergoing meditations. And also there will be a co-host to support this with you, who's a video host and can feed back with you, take questions and answers. And so it can be a very dynamic time where we're all of us immersed in this very deeply and profoundly liberating work. And it was also my prayer that all of you get the book, The Journey, my original book that I wrote many, many years ago, so that you could feel like you understood what takes place in the process work, and that you will also have received, so that you could have downloaded it and printed it out, the process work, the latest up to the minute work, so that you can partner with people and process with them and feel that you're getting this very latest in-depth work. And so I'd like to ask you to first join me by, let's all take a nice deep breath in together of openness and just breathing that into your room. And a deep breath in of the willingness to meet whatever your own soul wants you to meet while we're sharing this powerful time together. So breathing willingness into the room. And then trust. Trust in yourself, trust in life, trust in grace, that your own soul is actually the one who invited you to go on this journey, to come home to the love that you are, to the peace that exists inside all of us, so that you finally feel at home in your own skin, and to clear whatever you're meant to clear here during this time, and to really come to a place of wholeness and of feeling like you can live your life from your heart, but from a sense of being at home within your own skin. And so breathing trust, trust in yourself, trust in life, trust in grace in the universe, and know that you're ready. You wouldn't have enrolled for this deeply liberating seminar unless you yourself were ready. And so breathing that trust into the room. And just surrendering. And there will be processes that we do where I will be inviting you to speak out loud into your own room. So I pray that you're someplace where you can be privately on your own. And what I've learned with journey work, that is, you've heard the expression, better out than in. And that when you speak something out loud, it's like it's getting it up out of your body and it's leaving you. And when you don't speak it out loud, it just kind of stays and plays inside your body and in your being. So decide now that you're going to participate fully, and we're going to be having process work with eyes open, where you'll be emptying out loud and speaking out loud. You may be typing some of what's going on for you in a chat box. You may actually be undergoing one-to-one process work with one of the other people sharing this event with us. And I'll be taking you into closed eye meditations. And then the co-presenter, the video host, will also have interactive live sessions where you can do questions and answers and feel like you are deeply immersed and hugely supported to undergo this deeply liberating work. So I trust that you're probably familiar that the work, 26 years ago was originally born from my own direct experience from healing from a basketball-sized tumor. And it really sent me on my own healing journey. Even though I had been in the field of integrative medicine, complementary medicine, and well-being and personal growth my whole adult life and had been certified in so many different fields, I was living, breathing, and doing all of those things that we are trained to do in the field of health and well-being. And I still ended up with this massive tumor, and it really sent me reeling because I realized I was being invited to go someplace deeper than all the work that was going on at that time. And so I'm inviting you to join me to go someplace deeper than you may have been before. And so often I hear from people, they have done every course out there. And yet when they finally do the journey, that's when they genuinely come home. And they really clear their blocks and limitations and shutdowns and feel a sense of deep abiding peace. And so I welcome you to participate fully in this radically life-changing work. Now, one of the things you need to know, and what we all need to know, is the journey, it was originally based in a lot of the work going out there in the field of cellular healing. And one of the things that we know, it's even on the CDC's site, that 85% of all illness has an emotional basis. And the reason they could say that on their site is because of all the work going on in the field of cellular healing. And what we know about emotions and the effect that they have on our cells is that when we feel a strong emotion and we repress it, it releases a quantifiable biochemistry into our bloodstream, which will go to certain cell receptors and block them, rendering our cells incapable of communicating with the rest of the cells in the body. And if over time illness happens, well, of course it happens where the cells are blocked. Conversely, what's also known to be true is that when you feel your emotions very openly and freely, just naturally like a child does, our cell receptors remain open. And so the journey work was born from me knowing the science of what's happening with our emotions and what's that doing to our body, and developing a method so that all of us can go on a journey inside our bodies to get to these trapped cells, these blocked cells, and to go through a process of uncovering what were the emotions that got stored there, the cell memories that are stored there, what was the pain that got locked in there, and the words that and programming that got stored in my cells. And with the journey, not only do you go on a journey inside your body and uncover these old cell memories, but you go through a gentle but quite deep process of releasing that stored consciousness, of releasing the pain, the unspoken words, the shame, the blame, whatever it is you were living through at the time, the fear, and going through a process of actually understanding what took place for you at the time that that cell memory got stored inside your body. And ultimately, you go through a process of forgiveness. And something magical happens. When you forgive, that's when you let go of your whole story of pain, suffering, all the blame. It's when you finish with it. And so when new regenerative cells are born, they're born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. And I've been loving using the journey around the world. I never could have known that when I wrote that book about 24 years ago, that it would end up being a massive bestseller and sweeping around the globe. And right now, many of you know that I'm giving journey seminars in 39 countries and is actually translated into 24 languages. And as you can imagine, over time, because the work was born from direct living experience, not from some formula out there, some idea or notion that someone gave me, but it was born originally from direct living experience. And then now, over the last 26 years, as I've been working with people, I've seen what works with them. And I've also seen what doesn't work. And so the work has gotten deeper, more user-friendly. It's gotten more vast in all the contexts in which it can be applied to. There's been ongoing seminars being given that are where you can go through a whole Journey Practitioners program, and is even being used by medical doctors and in hospitals, and by psychiatrists and psychologists, and in schools it's being used, and it's being used by all people from all walks of life. And I'm so thrilled. Recently, I was invited to be on the board of directors for two hospitals in Israel, to be on the board of consultants for their recovery center. And what I'm working with is, they have one hospital that has a whole oncology program where, let's say someone has cancer and they undergo the operation there. And they have a week-long recovery center where, after you've had your operation, you then will use journey work to get to the emotional corollary of what co-created the illness in the first place. And so that you can clear yourself from these old themes that our bodies and our beings and our souls most want us to clear and learn from, because all of us get wake-up calls. And we want to learn the life lessons so it doesn't show up again down the line because we haven't learned what we needed to learn the first time. And so also they have a heart center where, after your heart operations, you can go into that recovery center and you can undergo journey work to get to the cell memories that were there inside your heart, to come to a place of wholeness, which activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which can allow healing to happen very quickly after all the operations and all the work you've done. And so I love working in tandem with medical doctors and with the health field and with integrative medical practice that are wanting to include this beautiful work alongside the amazing work that the medical field is doing out there at this time. And, there's a wonderful thing that's taken place. It's what I call the Roger Bannister effect. Because over the last 26, years, as the hundreds of thousands of people have undergone the journey work and done this work alongside whatever other program they're doing, we've seen people heal from all manner of emotional and physical issues. And where it was, who Roger Bannister was? He was the first Olympic runner to run a 4-minute mile. Now, it was believed that anatomically, physically, it was impossible for us to run a 4-minute mile. But when he broke through that barrier, it's like he opened a door in consciousness. And even at that Olympics, there were a couple of other runners who actually, for the first time, broke through that 4-minute mile barrier in consciousness. And now it's down to 3 minutes and 46 seconds. This that was believed to be humanly impossible. A door was opened and now has become the norm. The same thing has happened with the journey. As people began to heal from all kinds of things, from arthritis and eczema and Crohn's disease and Lyme disease and from skin rashes and from cancer and brain tumors and all manner, from multiple sclerosis and all manner of diseases, that as they healed, it's like they opened a door in consciousness. And now everyone is freely going through that door. And so this is work you can absolutely feel free to use alongside whatever program you are on. And not just physically healing. I mean, obviously, it first became known for that. And I first started working with the journey when I went to Britain, and I was invited to speak to cancer centers so that people could, let's say they were undergoing chemotherapy, and they could actually get a journey process while that was happening. But yes, first became available, and it was known for all the cellular healing that happens with it. But also, it's known for emotional healing and for coming to a place of wholeness and to a place of peace in your life. And it's actually what my deepest prayer is for people, that they give themselves the journey before it manifests as illness down the line, so that we, all of us, undergo the journey before we get some massive wake-up call, like I got a massive wake-up call. And one of the things that I got invited to do was to work with the Ministry for Education in Israel. And I was very moved by them asking to offer this work to their school teachers and also to the ministers in the governmental department. And the reason I was moved by that, because I have been invited to work in school systems in other countries, and usually what happens is we train the teachers and they then offer it to the students. But in this particular time, the Minister of Education, she came and asked that we offer a year-long training to those of her staff that were head of the, let's say, head of high schools or head of the grade schools, head of consultations, head of principals. And so the people were heads of all the departments in the Ministry for Education. And so for a year long, they underwent this training. And what I was moved by them is because they said, you know what, we're not willing to have our teachers undergo this work unless those of us in the government have undergone it. And at the end of a year, we sat in a circle together in the Ministry for Education itself in Tel Aviv. And there were 40 of the heads of departments there. And the minister said to me, she said, you know, I don't want you to say anything yet, Brandon. I just want you to hear our stories. And there was a woman who had breast cancer, and during that year, she had healed from breast cancer, and another one had a very acrimonious marriage and divorce, and it was very painful, but she came through feeling at peace in herself. And yet the one that touched me most deeply was one of the heads of the departments. She said, you know, I didn't have anything traumatic happening in my life, like a divorce, and I didn't have anything physically wrong with me, Brandon. She said, it's just that I had so much anger in my life. And she said, you know, I've been walking these ministry halls for the last 18 years. And I've just gotten to a point where I've been so stressed out and so angry all the time. Every time I got to a committee meeting, all I would ever do was just argue all the time with everybody. And we'd make another appointment for another committee meeting so I could argue some more. I'd gotten to a point where I wouldn't even look people in the eye in the morning. I wouldn't shalom to them, which is their greeting, which means peace. It's as a welcome greeting. And she said, you know, and I have 8 children. And of course, they were trying to replace those lost during the Holocaust. And she said, I would come home at night having gone to the supermarket and then have to make dinner for my husband and my 8 children. And the children, they were always, every time, late for dinner. And I would find myself shouting all the way through dinner. And she said, I just got to a point where I hated my life. And she said, the first time I did my journey process, I uncovered what was the root of what was causing all this surface anger in my life. And I got to the cell memories that had been driving this surface anger. It was at a much deeper level. And when I cleared it out at that deep level, the surface anger just fell away. And that night, after I did my first journey process, I got home, and of course the kids, they were late for dinner yet again. And I thought to myself, who cares? I have 8 healthy, beautiful children. I'm so blessed. Who cares if they eat cold food? It's still healthy. And she said, you know, my youngest at the end of the dinner time said, my little 8-year-old girl, she said, Mommy, where has all the anger gone? And she said, the next day I got into work and I began looking people in the eyes. And I'd seen that all of those, my colleagues, all of them had their journey processes, and they were shining. And we got more done in that committee meeting that day than we had gotten done in the last 10 meetings. And the reason I love to share her story with all of you is because I think all of us can relate to that. All of us have emotional issues that no matter how much we've worked on them, we still feel hooked by them. And the journey can help you get to the emotional root cause of what put that surface issue in place. Now, we're going to be undergoing journey work here directly, where you get a direct living experience of it, because that's the best way you can learn, is from the inside out. And I want to share with you some of what you might uncover in your own journey process that you'll be undergoing this morning and sharing with the other people taking this course. And one of the things that happened, and there's been a lot of research done on DNA and how, of course, I mean, we all of us, and we've known this for decades, that if there's a physical propensity for illness, that's stored in our DNA. So let's say a friend of yours goes to an oncologist and they've been diagnosed with breast cancer. What is the first question the oncologist asks? They ask, who in your family had cancer? Because they know that the propensity for illness, specific kinds of illness, are passed down through our DNA generationally. Now, in more recent decades, they have discovered there's this whole field called epigenetics, which has discovered that not only is the physical propensity for illness passed down through the generations, but what our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents experienced before us emotionally, the themes that they grappled with and what they emotionally went through has been passed down generationally. Right now, they're saying it's between 4 and 6 generations of the emotional themes that our forebears experience have been passed down through our DNA. And the first time I uncovered the truth of this was when I was in Germany, and it was in 2003, and I had offered the Journey Intensive in Munich. And on the second day of the Journey Intensive, and that'll be tomorrow for you, we undergo something that's called the physical journey, where you actually go on a journey inside your body and you uncover the cell memories that are there in specific cellular locations. And this man said that he went inside his heart. And he said, I don't have any particular heart problems. He looked to be a man in his late 30s or early 40s. And he said, so I was surprised when I went inside my heart. But the cell memory I uncovered there was totally unexpected. It wasn't my own. It was my mother's, and she was in the concentration camps in World War II. And I, of course, like most of us in this room, and there were about 240 people in the room right there, he said, like most of the people in this room, I was born post-World War II. And that my mother, once I was born, she went what is called in German, stumm. We don't talk about what happened in that war. And he said, ever since I was born, I didn't know what was wrong with me. He said, but I felt like I had this lid over my life. Even though I had no clue what my mother had experienced prior to my birth, I did know she was in the camps, but I knew nothing more than that. It's like I was born with a lid over my life, that I did not have permission to be carefree and silly and, God forbid, make mistakes. I didn't have permission to be free and enthusiastic and joyous and crazy and wild. And I just felt like I had this lid over my life. I had to be perfect all the time, serious all the time. I had to get it right. I didn't have permission to make mistakes. And I asked everyone in the room, well, how many of you feel like this? That you were born post World War II, but you've grown up with this lid over your life. And everyone raised their hands. And then I looked at my own life, and my mother, she grew up in Vienna, Austria, and her father was put into a Nazi prison and he was shot through the head. And her first husband was a photojournalist. You know, they were shooting the bombing happening, the newsreels. And he was a photojournalist working there in World War II, and he got shot down by the Luftwaffe. And so my brother, Mike, he was born there without a father. And my father, American soldier, met my mother and they fell in love and moved to America. So I was born and raised in New York. And, you know, most of us think of America as a country where you feel that you are free to be all that you're capable of being, that you are free to realize your highest and your best potential. And yet, when I looked back at my life, I realized that I had been born with a lid over my life. And that I too did not have permission to be wild and carefree and make mistakes and get it wrong and be, you know, enthusiastic, that, you know, I was always having to be serious, get it right, be perfect. And I realized that I was serving there in Europe, not just to bring awakening and healing to the Europeans, but for my own awakening and my own healing. And I realized that many of us, we are carrying the issues that our forebears went through. And like this man's mother, my mother, when she got to America, she went shtum. We don't talk about what happened in the Holocaust. I didn't even know my grandfather's name. I didn't know that he'd been shot through the head in a Nazi prison. I didn't know what had happened to her former husband. I literally knew nothing. And so some of what you uncover inside of you may not be your own. You may recognize that they are themes that have been passed on to you generationally. And so this is why I'm saying to you, please keep a wider context of what it is you may uncover inside yourself in doing the journey work that you're going to undergo in this immersion that we're in right now. So as most of you already know, the journey was born from my own direct experience of healing from a basketball-sized tumor. And I can remember I'd moved from New York City. And at that time, I was a therapist in New York City. And we had done a radical thing as therapists. We decided that we would not tell people how to heal. Now think about this. This is the late 1970s. Early 1980s, after I had been trained for 10 years in all different areas and been accredited and certified in so many different areas of complementary medicine. And we decided to do this experiment, that we would open a free of charge healing clinic, but we would not be so arrogant as to tell people what their healing journeys should be. And so we invited people who maybe even the medical field had given up on and said, you know, there's nothing more we can do for you. Or people who just didn't want to go the medical route. And we just let them design their own programs. And if someone wanted to go on a cleanse, they could go on a cleanse. If someone wanted to take herbs for cleansing or get nutritional support or get colonics, you know, 3 times a week, they could do that. If they wanted massage, if they wanted chiropractic work, they could do that. If they wanted to get acupuncture, they could do that. If they wanted guided visualization or NLP, they could do that. If they wanted to undergo medical hypnosis, they could do that. And if people wanted to experience breath work, that was also an option for people. And we decided to invite people just to use our services, which we would offer, you know, free of charge, unconditionally. And people could design their own programs to take themselves on their own programs. And of course, in the afternoon, we did have to charge for our services because we did have to pay for that clinic. But it was an amazing time there in the late 1970s, because often people will have been told it was not possible to heal anymore. There was nothing more that the medical field could do for them, and it would just be a slow process of death. And you know, they might go on to a deep nutritional cleanse and go get herbs and combine a lot of things, do guided visualization, meditation, yoga. They might do acupuncture and breath work. And they, you know, depending on what they felt drawn to, and usually not after just 1 or 2 things, but sometimes there were a number of them who, after several months of doing this work together, that they healed against the odds unexpectedly. And so these people were my heroes. Now, at that time, I met Tony Robbins, and he was only 24 years old at that time. And so a very young man. And his greatest passion in life was health, and which was my greatest passion in life. And so I ended up going on the road with Tony Robbins, ultimately becoming a presenter for him. And I was presenting the Living Health series that he was giving after he would give the weekend seminar. And I moved from New York City to Malibu, California. And I was living in this little tiny beach shack, you know, on the beach there, on the sand there. And I was living, breathing, doing everything I believed in, meditating every day, working out every day, yoga. And not only that, 100% vegetarian food. 70% of it was raw, fresh and raw fruits and vegetables, 30% cooked. And more importantly than all of that, I was in a marriage I felt deeply fulfilled to be in. And I was doing work that I was passionate about, and that I felt grace to stand in front of 6,000 people and share with them practical tools of how to create vibrant health. And at the age of 39 years old, you could say that I was at a peak in my life. I hadn't been ill, not even a sniffle, for 10 years. I felt vibrant, alive, and I felt grateful to be alive. Now, very often people will tell you, well, you got ill because you were stressed. But I didn't feel stressed. I felt blessed. And so I was just absolutely blown over when my own tummy began to grow. And I didn't want to believe it can't be happening to me, because after all, I'm doing everything right. And my tummy started to grow very slowly at first. And it got to a point where I couldn't even zip up my trousers. And I so much didn't want to believe this could possibly be happening to me that suddenly I started wearing the long flowing dresses that were popular that year. So I didn't have to face the fact that I couldn't zip up my trousers. And one day I was sitting for meditation, and I've been sitting for meditation like many of you have since I was 19 years old, when I first learned meditation while I was at university. And you know how in meditation sometimes you can fall into this place of stillness where your mind, your thinking mind, starts to wind down, and it fell into the background and then just dissolved away. And I was in this thought-free stillness. And out of nowhere came a gut knowing I might be seriously ill, and I needed to get real and get myself to an orthodox medical doctor so I could have all the tests done that are available these days. And when I came out of that meditation, I was just overwhelmed with shame. And I thought, my God, Brandon, here you're teaching 4,000, 6,000 people every time you give a seminar how to create vibrant health, and you might be seriously ill. And I felt so much shame. And conversely, so much inexplicable pride in all of my degrees and all of my certifications, and having been immersed in this field for so many years, for over 20 years. And I didn't have the guts to call up my best friend and ask her for a recommendation to go to the kind of specialist that she was going to. Instead, I took the chicken shit way out. I went to the local Barnes & Noble and I pulled down a book from a shelf in the women's section. I obviously could see where I'd gained the weight. And when I called the number at the back of the book, and this was a surgeon who did not recommend hysterectomies, and I'd seen where I'd gained the weight, and when I spoke to the nurse, she said, "Do you know who this surgeon is?" She works for the California State Board of Medicine. You probably couldn't get in to see her for 6 or 8 months. And I said, I didn't know. I just called the number at the back of the book. And I said, "Please, if there's a cancellation, will you call me?" And she says, "Well, I'll write your name down, but I can't make any promises. It's not very likely." And I put the phone down and whoa, burning, overwhelmed with shame. I still didn't have the guts to call up my best friend. But 3 days later, the nurse, she called me back and she said, did I want to have an appointment? And it was in several weeks' time. And I said, "Oh, yes, please." And I didn't know that the nature of this tumor in the beginning, it was growing very slowly. As a matter of fact, when I got to the doctor's office, she said it probably started as 1 cell when I was 8 years old. And then it replicated into 2 cells. But by the end, in those final weeks before I saw her, the cells were replicating exponentially and aggressively. And I looked about 6 months pregnant, though I knew I wasn't. Got in to see her, and I'm not going to go through that whole graphic exam, except to say at the end of it, she said, "Brandon, you are equivalent to a pregnancy with a tumor that's about the size of a basketball." And I'm sure you would think that with all my training and all the different fields of health and well-being that I had in personal growth, that I would have taken that news with some sort of, I don't know, at least some sort of understanding and relaxation. I got to tell you, truthfully, my mind was going a million miles a minute, and I was frightened out of my skin. And we got in, and at this point, I finally had the guts to call up my best friend. And so I had my best friend with me in the consultation room. And the more the doctor was talking, and it was just like, it was almost like it was going over my head. I couldn't even hear it. My mind was just reeling. And my friend was asking all the questions that I needed to be asking. And finally, I just said, stop. I'm in the integrative medical field. I'm in the complementary medical field. I need to be given a chance to give it my best shot. And she said, "Brandon, you chose me because you know this. I practice integrative medicine, and connected to this clinic, we've got acupuncture that you can undergo. We prescribe herbs for people, homeopathics. We have meditation. We even have yoga. And if I thought you could go that route, that's the first route that I would recommend for you. But you're bleeding internally. This tumor has grown all the way from this pelvic mass, as she called it. It's grown all the way from the pelvic region all the way up into your diaphragm. Haven't you noticed that you're breathing shallowly? It's gotten huge, and it's crushing your organs. And this is not your period happening. You're bleeding internally. You're going to need to go into hospital today. We need to find out, is it malignant or benign? But actually, it's not going to matter. You're going to have this this pelvic mass removed, and it doesn't matter whether it's malignant or benign, it's crushing your other organs. And I said to her, I said, well, please, I'm trained in so many different fields, in medical hypnosis and NLP and in herbs and homeopathics and so many different fields. And she said, Brandon, you need to get real. If you look at all the case studies behind me, there's not a woman who has had the size of the mass that you have who successfully healed herself. So though I may wish you well and actually believe in that, you need to get real. We talked for another 20 minutes, and I finally got her to agree that if one of my methods, I could get the bleeding to stop over the next 3 days, could she buy me some time to give it my best shot? And she agreed that if I could get the bleeding to stop over the next 3 days, then I would try to do everything that I do in the health field. But we agreed that if in a month's time it was not significantly healed, then she would do what she knew how to do, which was she would surgically remove it. And I can remember so clearly walking out of their offices, which was in downtown LA. And at this point, my mind is just reeling. I mean, the thoughts are just assaulting me. My heart's thumping through the roof. And I realized I've been given a very short period of time, and that I was already living, breathing, doing everything that was available at that time. And that somehow I'm being invited to go beyond everything out there. And as I stepped outside her clinic, I looked up, and in front of me was this beautiful mimosa tree. And it was a tree I hadn't even noticed going in. And it had these beautiful golden blossoms that looked like golden rain. And when I looked up that, I was absolutely stopped, arrested by the beauty of this tree. And it was almost as if time stopped. And my racing thinking mind wound down and fell away. And out of nowhere, up came overwhelming gratitude. Gratitude just to see the beauty of the tree, to smell a fragrance I hadn't noticed going into the offices. A gratitude for just having a physical form. And as I was just overwhelmed in this gratitude, out of nowhere came a gut knowing. Somehow I would be guided to you. And even though I didn't know how that would be, I was so grateful for all the work going on in the field of cellular healing, and specifically at that time, grateful for the work of Dr. Deepak Chopra, who was kind of a pioneer in this field. Now, he was at that time Chief Surgeon General for a hospital in Boston, and he decided to do a radical thing. He decided that he would study people who had healed without medical intervention, without drugs or surgery, and to find out what is it that made them heal against the odds. And the reason that was so radical at that time, and this is 1992, is that all of us, whether you were trained in the complementary field of medicine or whether you were trained in the orthodox field of medicine, you were all trained the same way. Look at the symptoms that lead to ill health, that lead to death. We were all trained to focus on what makes people fail at healing, what makes people die. But Chopra said we know enough about what makes people fail. I want to know what makes them heal. What is that? And he amassed hundreds and ultimately thousands of case studies, and he found that he could only find 2 qualities that those who had healed without drugs or surgery had in common. through some spontaneous event or some act of grace, people had two qualities in common. One was that through some act of grace, they got access to this that he called the infinite intelligence. The part of you that makes your heart beat and your eyes shine and your hair grow. It's this vast field pervading all of existence that is your own essence. This infinite intelligence. The second quality that they had in common was through some act of grace or spontaneous event, they actually had got access to this that he at that time called the phantom cell memory. And what we know about the cells inside the body is that they all replicate at varying speeds. So for instance, if any of you have ever had a suntan, you'll notice that your tan faded in about 3 weeks' time, if you notice that. Now, that's because the old cells sloughed off and were replaced by new regenerative cells. Now, this process of regeneration is happening at different speeds in all parts of our body. So for instance, your liver, it takes about 6 weeks for the old cells to die away and to replace by all new cells. Stomach lining, under 3 days. The one that blows my mind are the eye cells, because when you touch the eye cells, they feel firm, don't they? Well, do you know that in less than 2 days, in less than 48 hours, you will have an all-new inner eyeball? Now, this was so impossible for my thinking mind to even conceive of. How could that be true? And yet my mother at that time, she had one of those very common eye operations where they slit the eye open, insert a lens, put the flap back, and put a patch on. And only a day and a half later, they took off the patch and she could see clearly. Not even 2 days. As a matter of fact, there will not be a single molecule in your body a year from now that was here today. But Chopra asked something that no one else was asking at that time. He was asking, well, why is it if you look at a liver that's riddled with cancer in January, why would that liver be riddled with cancer in June? And if it's constantly regenerating. And what he postulated at that time, which has only subsequently been verified by scientists all over the world, is that stored inside the degenerative cell are these old repressed cell memories that I spoke about when we first began this video. These old times where we felt a strong emotion and we shut down and the biochemistry was released and went to those cells receptors. And the old memory from that time period, the emotion, the unspoken words, all of the consciousness of that time period was stored in that cell. And before the new cells were born, that old programming, that old consciousness was passed on to the next cell generation as a new cell generation. And so that old programming kept being passed on from one cell to the next cell, which is why my own oncologist, she said to me, it probably started when you were 8 years old. And it started as one cell and it got passed down. And so what those people had in common who had healed without drugs or surgery is through some spontaneous event, they actually got access to this vast field of peace, of love. This that Chopra called the infinite intelligence, that I call source, the soul. And if somehow they opened into that infinite intelligence and spontaneously somehow got access to those cells and really released what was stored there, then when the new cells were born, they were born devoid of that old consciousness as new regenerative cells. Now, I knew all this. I was at the cutting edge of what was happening in the field of health and well-being and personal growth. And I've actually seen some of those case studies with my own eyes. I'd studied with Chopra, but I got to tell you something. You can know all the science on the planet. You can actually see case studies and realize how it's possible that you can heal cellularly. But unless you have a method, it's no more than a bunch of, well, very inspiring possibilities on a page with a bunch of statistics. That's where I stood. And yet when I looked at that mimosa tree and my mind fell away and I was left in this vast field of stillness out of nowhere, I got a gut knowing that somehow I would be guided to heal. And even though I didn't have a clue how that would be, I still knew somehow I would be guided. Now, of course, I did all the things that I didn't know how to do at that time. I went on to a fresh and raw fruits and vegetables, went on a cleanse, took herbs for cleansing, homeopathics. I had colonics every other day, massages every day, did cranial visceral work. I did guided visualizations, NLP. I did medical hypnosis. I did acupuncture. I mean, I was doing everything available out there. And I was 3 weeks into my healing journey, and I was looking radiantly healthy. I mean, vibrantly alive from all that cleansing, right? But my stomach was still stretched as hard as a rock and taut like a drum. And I was beginning to panic because I knew that in only a week and a half's time, I was going to have to go back to that doctor and let her do something that did not feel right for me. So I ended up calling up an oncologist friend of mine, his name is Kabir, and I said, listen, we both of us studied with Chopra. Have you come across anyone that has been able to help people get access to those cell memories that are stored inside of us and to the emotional programming that is co-creating the illness? And he said, I haven't actually come across a method, but like you, I've of course studied with Chopra. And he said, but I go to a massage therapist once a week and sometimes emotional things come up. Why don't you go to her? You never know. And so here's what happened. I flew up to Berkeley and I was lying on the massage table. And at this point, I was looking at my whole life, my professional life as both a teacher and as a therapist, trained and certified in so many fields. And as I was lying there, my eyes were closed and she's giving me a massage. And it's like my whole professional life and everything I believed to be true started crumbling away. And I realized and felt myself to be an abject failure because everything that was available out there I had done, and nothing had worked. And as I started to let go, something inside of me gave up. Something inside of me just surrendered. And I fell from this feeling of being an abject, out and out failure into a hopelessness and a helplessness and a feeling I don't even know what questions to ask anymore. I don't even know what answers to seek anymore. I don't know where to turn. And something inside of me just opened into this hopeless helplessness. And I let go. And I fell into a deep black despair. And there was this blackness, this nothingness, this despair everywhere. And I began to wonder, is there really any way? And I just gave up. And as I let go in this nothingness, this blackness, as I let go, pinpricks of light started to come into and suffuse the blackness, and a presence that I actually didn't have a name for. It was a presence of peace, of stillness, innocence. I didn't have a name for it, but it was bathing me and holding me, embracing me. And so I'm still getting a massage. And then spontaneously a prayer rises. Please, let me be guided inside this tumor and discover what's there. I actually didn't expect an answer. At the most unexpected moment, I am guided in that tumor. And when I uncover the cell memory there, I think it cannot be this cell memory. I know all about the cell memory. It's a cell memory and a theme that I had been visiting over again in 8 years of therapy in New York City. It's a cell memory of childhood abuse and violence. And I'd done so much work on it, and I'd so long since come to a place of acceptance in my life. And my know-it-all, arrogant therapist thinking myself, it cannot be this memory. I've long since come to a place of acceptance, and that's what my arrogant thinking mind was saying. But my body and my soul were saying, you know what? You've got nothing to lose by at least, releasing what's here and undergoing. And I ended up undergoing a process I'd undergone many times before in the past. And I arrived at the same place of acceptance that I had been at for many years. And I asked this peace, this that I now call source, that I'd spontaneously somehow fallen into. I asked the peace, am I complete? And the simple word, no. And again, I was plunged into despair. And I thought, you know what? I don't even believe this is the right cell memory. But even if it is, I don't know how to complete. And something inside of me just let go in the despair. And again, I fell into this omnipresent field of love, of peace, of light. My eyes are still closed. She's still giving me a massage. Later, another prayer arises. Please, how? How to complete? I don't expect an answer. And at the most unexpected moment, the word forgiveness is here. And immediately my know-it-all therapist thinking to myself, oh, what kind of difference could forgiveness make? I already knew about this cell memory and all the childhood abuse. I've already since cleared that. I've come to a place of acceptance. And my thinking mind was fighting like crazy. But my heart and my body said, you can't afford not to forgive. And so I thought, okay, I'll attempt to forgive. And I opened my heart to forgive. And it hurt. Because, you see, I'd created this whole identity, this noble identity of Brandon, the noble, understanding, and compassionate therapist who'd come to accept her violent past. And I had to face down 30 years of pride, dressed up as acceptance. And it hurt to face down that much pride. But finally, I did step down off my own self-made pedestal. And I wholeheartedly opened my heart. And as I was absolutely forgiving, I realized that tumor had never been clinging to me. I'd been clinging to it. and 30 years of a blame game, dressed up as compassion and understanding. 30 years of my blame game. It was finally over. Now I got up from that massage table and I started to feel very disoriented, like the molecules were buzzing. I didn't know what was happening, but it was feeling very strange and a lot was going on with my body. And by then, my know-it-all, arrogant thinking mind was saying, what a load of crap that was. You already knew about the cell memories of violent childhood abuse. You've already done work on that. You've come to a place of acceptance. And what difference could forgiveness possibly make? And my mind was having a heyday of self-criticism. And I don't know if any of you can feel like I do sometimes, where you know how your mind just won't shut up and it's telling you how full of crap you are and how full of shit you are. And my mind just wouldn't shut up. And yet my body was feeling so disoriented and I don't know, like the molecules were buzzing. And finally, my mind grew fascinated with what was going on with my body. And it turned all its direction and its focus on the body. And it finally shut up. And I got back to the bed and breakfast I was staying at the time. And I lay down on the bed and I didn't know this, but because science will tell you that you only have one cell memory stored in a particular cellular location. And you know what? I would say 98% of the time that is true. But I didn't just have one cell memory. I had what I would call a pearl necklace made up of cell memories of violent childhood abuse. And as I lay there on the bed, it was like so many demons rushing. All the other cell memories of childhood abuse started flooding out of me. And I didn't know what to do with them. And so I didn't do anything, which I've subsequently come to realize is the best way to be. I mean, if you vomited, you wouldn't look at your vomit and pull it apart and go, oh, where did you come from? What point in my life are you from? And why are you showing up? And, oh, what point in my life did you come from? You'd say, better out than in. And that's what I did. Now, for those of you who know about the journey and have read the book, you'll realize that that process was not the only journey process I did at that time. But what I realized that time, that in my case, I had this pearl necklace that was made up of pearls of all the violent abuse that I had in my life. And something wondrous happened when I forgave. It's like I broke that pearl necklace and one pearl came off in that first process that I did on the massage table. But as I lay there on the bed, all the other childhood memories came sliding off that necklace like so many demons rushing, and I didn't touch it. Now, during the next 3.5 weeks, I ended up doing 2 more processes, and I ended up going to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Santa Monica. And I went and had all the scans done of my uterus. Now, in that whole 6.5-week period of time, I watched as from the first time I did my first journey process, and we all know how long it takes for the uterine cells to heal, because we all know what happens once a month. So in that 3.5-week period of time, from that very first journey process till the time I got to hospital, my tummy was getting flatter and flatter. So I knew something was going on, but I didn't know wholly what had happened. And so the surgeon, she had taken 43 scans and she brought them out to me, and she brought out a textbook. And she showed me a uterus of a 16-year-old and my scans. And she said, look at this, you're going to be turning 40 in just a month's time. And you've got the uterus of a 16-year-old. I mean, your textbook perfect clean. You couldn't be healthier. And, you know, internally, I was I was through the roof, but being a cool New Yorker, I would never be so uncool. And internally, I went, yeah. But externally, I said to the doctor, oh, that's wonderful news. And then I did this totally uncool thing. I'm in this famous hospital, you know, there in LA. And I go out into the corridor and I check to see when the coast is clear and all the nurses and orderlies have all gone into their rooms. And then I skipped all the way to the elevator and skidded to a stop. And when I stepped out of Cedar Sinai Hospital, I stood in front of those doors and I was overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude. Just to be able to smell the fragrance, to see the beautiful colors of life. Gratitude. Just to breathe. And that gratitude has stayed with me ever since that day as one of the countless gifts that that tumor gave me. Now, I realized as I was standing there, I was just another textbook case study like had happened in Chopra's case studies, that spontaneously 3 times I'd somehow open into this vast field of presence, of stillness, of source. And spontaneously, I'd gotten access to the cell memory stored inside my body. And spontaneously, I had released and let go and come to the place of forgiveness. Now, I actually knew what to do if I ever came across a cell memory, but I hadn't noticed what had I done to spontaneously open into this vast field of the infinite intelligence. And I thought, you know what? Maybe this has happened to me because we're at a time in history where people are ready to participate in their own healing journey. And that maybe I'm not meant to just be another statistics or another case study. That maybe I'm able to develop a method here that all of us can use. Now, I knew what to do if a cell memory came up, but I didn't know what to do. How to open people into this that I call source. And so I put out a prayer that I would be guided. And 3 months later, I was guided. And I took what I knew about how to directly open into the infinite intelligence, this part of you that makes your heart beat and your eyes shine and your hair grow. And I partnered and coupled it with what to do if you uncover a cell memory. And I did a year's set of case studies with people. And I worked with people with all kinds of physical issues, from arthritis to heart disease, to eczema, to brain tumors. And certainly wasn't with every person that I worked with. But there were a number of them, a significant portion of them, who not after one process, but who healed after several months of doing journey work. And I also worked with people who had all kinds of emotional issues that no matter how much work they'd done on them, they still kept coming up for them, that they were still hooked by them, that they were running on automatic pilot. And there was this one man, he loved his kids, but he couldn't stop beating them when the rage would overtake him. There was another man who had such low self-esteem, felt himself to be so worthless. He owned a very successful IT company, and yet he felt so worthless inside himself that every year when he had to do the annual meeting and the annual speech about the way the company was doing, it was very successful, he'd fall apart in the annual meeting. And I worked with another woman who had been grieving for her husband, who she'd lost like 16 years before. And I worked with all kinds of emotional issues, and it didn't seem to matter what our beliefs are in life, what our walk is in life, how old we are, what our religious beliefs are. Everyone is capable of going on their own healing journey. Everyone is capable of opening down through the layers of the emotions into the infinite intelligence. Everyone is capable of clearing their cell memories, coming to wholeness inside, getting to the root of what is causing their surface emotions. And everyone is capable of undergoing the healing journey. And so the work originally developed out of that and got more user-friendly as I saw what worked and what didn't work. And it expanded and it's become what it is today. So if I had to say in a nutshell, what is the journey? I would do it by giving you a metaphor that all of us come into this life as this radiant, shining diamond, absolutely whole, completely free, as a vast field of oneness, of love, of peace, of awareness. As a matter of fact, science has found that when you are born and in the first weeks of an infant's life, you feel yourself to be part of all of existence, one with everything, to such a degree that when mother's hand becomes before your eyes, before an infant's eyes, the infant feels mother's hand to be part of itself. That's how vast this vast field of love is, that is your essence, that is your soul. You came in as this oneness, feeling connected to all of existence. But unfortunately, through the course of life's pains and trials, this vast field of presence gets covered over with a series of lies, shutdowns, pains, traumatic events. And when we get to be adults, we cover this whole mess over with this bright, shiny, polished veneer that we present to the world. And then we wonder why it is everyone thinks we're so full of, you can say it, bullshit. And then if you get to be very lucky, life gives you a wake-up call. Now, these wake-up calls can come in so many forms. It can come in the form of a loss of a loved one, or an acrimonious divorce, or in my case, it came as a serious illness, or it can come in the form of a loved one going off to war, where for a moment you crack through this polished veneer and you open down through the layers of the lies and the pains, the limitations and the shutdowns, and you end up spontaneously opening into this field of love that you came in as. And you realize it's been there all along. Only, like me, you identified with the layers that covered it. And you end up falling so in love with the truth of who you are, with the freedom inside, with your own essence, that like me, you will do anything to clear whatever blocks you, whatever obscures you, whatever holds you back on any level of being, so that this radiant love, this peace, this joy, this freedom can live your life. And so we come in as this vast field, and then it gets covered over, and it can be something very simple, like you're 3 years old and you're crying about something, and your mother says, come, we got to dry our tears, we've got to get to the nursery school. And suddenly the child gets it. I'm not allowed to feel, at least not the ones that have the tears. And the first involuntary automatic shutdown happens. You start shutting down one emotion, you end up shutting them all down. Or it can be the kind of thing, I can remember I was 8 years old and I well, with a family with domestic violence, I fell in love with reading and escaping into my books. And of course, if you love reading as much as I love reading, I became a good reader and also a good speller. And so I got chosen to represent the third graders, the 8-year-olds, in a big spelling bee that was being given for our county. And so when all the different schools in the county came together and into a stadium, and I had been chosen to represent the 8-year-olds, and I was standing there on stage, and I looked out at everyone, and I'd spelled already 3 difficult words, and there was thousands of people there, the parents, the teachers, the students, and I'm there standing under the lights, and I'd already spelled 3 difficult words. And then they gave me one of the easiest words in the English language, is the word fleet. But I'd never seen that word fleet in any of my children's books. But I had seen the word flea, an insect. And I stood there and I said, F-L-E-A-T? And the whole stadium was hushed. And then it erupted into laughter. Now, no one had given me a manual. How do you deal with that kind of mass humiliation in front of your friends and the parents and the students? And I looked at my mother, and she was sitting there in the 3rd row where the parents of the contestants were. And I looked to her for support, and she looked back at me as if I was the greatest disappointment in her life. And she just shook her head, and she just went, and this internal wall came slamming down inside of me. And I went back to go sit with the other losers at the back of the stage. And that day, I decided I am so stupid. I'll never amount to anything. I'll never be good at anything I do. I'm so worthless. People will only ever laugh at me. I'll never be smart enough. I'll never be good enough. And what happens with these layers that we have inside of us, that we have the emotional shutdown, but then we have the beliefs that get to be part of the fabric of that shutdown. In my case, in the first one with the 3-year-old, I'm not allowed to feel, certainly not feelings that have any tears of them. Or the 8-year-old, I'm so stupid, I'm worthless, no one will ever do anything but laugh at me. I'll never amount to anything. I can remember when I was 16 years old, and I got this crush on this guy, and I tried to impress him, and you know how that goes. The more you try to impress for someone, the greater fool you make of yourself. And I ended up making a huge fool of myself, and I ended up watching the first love of my life running out of my life, and I was running after him, and of course I felt myself to be worthless, unlovable, unattractive. And the beliefs that got connected to that time period is I will never attract a boy or a man that I'm attracted to. I'm just not attractive enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy of love. Layer upon layer of these emotional events and the beliefs that get connected with them. Then when we get to be adults, it doesn't matter which of the 39 countries I go to, we've all learned how to put on this mask that says the world, no, I've got my act together. I'm reliable. I'm dependable. You can count on me. And so it's like this polished veneer that we present to the world. And then if you're very lucky, life gives you that wake-up call. And you end up cracking through this mask. You decide to just get real. And you crack through this mask. And you end up opening down through the layers of the lies, the pain, the shutdowns. And eventually, spontaneously, you open into this vast field of love, of light, of peace, that is your own essence. And you realize it's been there all along. Only we, all of us, identified with the layers that covered it.